Hello and welcome to the fourth Pokemon Zoology podcast, or PZP. If you're new to this, go back and listen to the first lot. But basically, my name is Joshua Dunlop, and I am a freelance concept artist, and I have a series online called Pokemon Zoology, where I take Pokemon and turn them into realistic adaptations. I just want to say thank you to everyone who is listening and has contributed to the Patreon or bought any prints or anything. Like, genuinely, you are all amazing. And everyone who's following me, like, it really, really means the world to me. So thank you very much. So today we have a few pictures. I worked really hard this month and just smashed through a load of them. So we have Nidorino, Nidorena, Chansey and Jigglypuff. Next on the list will be Clefable. I need to find some time just to kind of sit down and crack on with her, but I'm excited. You know, they're always a good challenge, these ones, I think, even though a lot of people think they look a bit creepy, but you know, what can you do? It's some Pokemon don't translate that well into realistic interpretations, but I do my very best. So so we might as well crack on. Nidorino is one I actually made a while back for a celebration picture. I think it was 150,000 followers on Instagram, and I did the opening scene with Nidorino and Gengar fighting. So thankfully I already had a model base to kind of work from for this picture. My influences for it were a few different things, really. There was obviously like rabbits and stuff were an element, but I brought in some things from rhinos and reptiles. I was kind of looking at more of a synapsid kind of design, which is kind of like the ancient ancestor blending mammals and reptiles together before they split into two separate species or genus. So when I was developing this, I already had the model. I just had to go through and do a few tweaks and make sure that it kind of would look like it was standing in the scene rather than the original, which was jumping. So I went through and I tweaked a few things, changed the body size a little bit, so the head was slightly larger, but I was really happy with how it turned out. The horns, I wanted to portray this idea that they had like these prickly needles all over them, which is in the Pokedex, and they are poison type, and the idea is that if you get stung then it's really, really bad. But translating that into something believable in terms of the horns and spikes on this one, it's kind of difficult because the originals, their spikes looked quite rounded and smooth. But what I did in my picture is that, I sculpted them as rounded and smooth, and then in Photoshop I went through and added a few kind of like sharp spines at the ends, so you could imagine that the majority of the spine is kind of protected by this shielded skin, and then if it pricks or stings, the needle can kind of penetrate deeper. It's not very nice, but sometimes I have to think about these things. But I was really happy with how it turned out, and I think it looked really good. I set it in a forest because the originally in the game you find them in the safari zone. I did think about having them in like a jungle type area, but I felt like a forest felt a bit more natural, especially with the kind of rabbit like elements in there. And I'd done like for Nidoran male, I'd set that in a forest as well, so it seemed only fitting to kind of have it in the similar environment. But yeah, I wanted to make it look really intimidating and feel like it's something you really don't want to mess with. But yeah, I was really happy with how it came out, especially with like the iridescence in the ears. But yeah, I was really happy with this piece. From there, the next one was Nidorina. Again, I basically took the head of Nidorino, and played with it, and smoothed it out, got rid of the horn, and then the body I had to fully sculpt from scratch because their bodies are, even though they are related, they are very different in their designs, especially as Nidorina is bipedal and stands on her two legs. One of the main things that I wanted to bring into this picture was the idea that though it was bipedal and could definitely stand on its hind legs using the weight of its tail to kind of balance it, I kind of wanted it to have this feel that it could walk on either two or four legs. And I think I got there. I think it's, some of these Pokemon are quite hard. The way they're drawn, very stylized, and their legs are really short or stubby. And a lot of the time, realistically, figuring out how they walk would be a bit of a nightmare, because anatomically they just couldn't. So I do have to tweak these things sometimes, make the legs a little bit longer, but I try to keep the stockiness in the shape so it's recognisable. But yeah, once again, I was really happy with this one. I really like the iridescence in the ears. I felt like bringing in the kind of the green and the purple to try and blend them together rather than having them as like individual shapes. I thought it worked really well. Yeah, and I enjoyed doing the scene as well. I kind of wanted it to feel like it was in kind of like the entrance to a damp cave or something along those lines, but still keep it feeling like it was part of like a forest scene and go from there. But yeah, I was very happy with how this one turned out, and I brought in a few more elements of rabbit in there with a few more whiskers and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, overall I was very, very satisfied with how it came out. But yeah, I was really chuffed. So the next one that we're going to talk about is Chansey. This one has been debated over by a lot of people. I did an original picture and it wasn't received too well, so I went through and I went back in and I tweaked it, and I made the eyes and the face bigger and moved the ears a bit forward and stuff. But the main things that I think people found hard to deal with was that it was fluffy. Most people, I think, had the idea that maybe it was an axolotl, kind of like a reptile or an amphibian in their heads, and I think also a lot of people just can't imagine it as furry, because and that's fair, because the way that Pokemon design their pictures, a lot of the time if they want them to have shaggy fur or something along those lines, they make sure that it's definitely portrayed through the artwork, and Chansey is smooth as an egg. But sometimes when I'm developing these things, I have to think about how they're going to be translated and how they're going to be perceived. Realistically, Chansey, if I had gone down the amphibian route, gave it, translucenty kind of pink skin or rubbery skin like a dolphin or something like that, I guarantee that it would come across very weird, like very creepy. And I know a lot of people thought this one was kind of creepy, but I assure you it would have been a lot worse if I'd gone down that route. So it was a personal choice for me to kind of go down the kind of fluffy rabbit wombat-esque route. I think for me, what I was trying to portray or trying to figure out was that, okay, so this thing has a pouch on the front of it, and it carries its egg everywhere, and I was trying to think about how that could translate. I think if it was a reptile or an amphibian, it would have once again looked very creepy, but I decided to go for the marsupial route, looking at specifically wombats and kangaroos, because we know that they have pouches, and that's a specific thing that they do for their young and how they carry their young and how they mature their young. Which kind of fit into the motherly aspect of Chansey, and how they're very maternal and they carry their eggs with them everywhere. The way that I was imagining the reason why they had their pouch was that it was used to incubate the eggs, and that they would keep them close to their bodies, so that essentially like how chickens sit on the eggs or birds sit on their eggs to keep them warm, Chansey wouldn't be restricted to sitting on a nest. They would have the bodily warmth on the egg 24/7 because they carry them with them. The pouch itself, I know a few people were saying that it looks pretty gross. If you've ever actually looked at a real marsupial pouch, trust me, it's weird looking. It's quite I can't give you words for it, but it's without being really, really gross, but it's it's quite a gross looking thing, grosser than what I portrayed, because the way that I did it, I kind of went along the lines of more sort of a cartoony pouch, while still giving elements of a realistic-y kind of looking pouch. So it's kind of like a blend in between those two. And I understand why some people find it a bit gross, but, that's nature. It's just we just have to accept it. Nature can be a bit gross sometimes. And I think if I'd done it any other way, it wouldn't have felt believable. It wouldn't have really felt like something a real animal would have. A few people did feel that the egg was a little flat, but I think maybe it was a misconception on their part, just because the way that I developed it was that a large amount of the egg would be sitting inside its fur. So you're only kind of seeing the front part of the egg, whereas the rest of it is sunken into the fur and into the pouch itself. But I used real eggs for reference and used real egg textures and stuff like that. So it was all of the lighting and shadowing, works for an egg, and I was very happy with that. A few people felt that the fur was a little bit dirty, which, personally, the way that I did it and developed it was that it was meant to have colour variation within the fur, which all animals have, even animals that look like a solid colour. Because I felt like if I'd gone like a really solid plain colour, 1, it wouldn't look as 3D, 2, it would have looked quite fake, really. It would look like fake fur, like a toy, rather than an animal. And, I don't want that. I'm trying to make them feel like they could be real animals. And yeah, I mean, like the overall kind of feel, the vibe I was going for was looking at kind of like an Easter egg bunny feel. And I wanted it to be cute and whatnot, but still keep its round shape. Again, I think if I had gone for like the rubbery texture, the anatomy wouldn't have really worked either, because it would mean that its skin would rub really easily against itself. A lot of these animals that have no fur are either designed for the water to reduce friction or designed for living deep underground, and I don't think that worked for either for Chansey, to be perfectly honest. But like the using the fur can, with a lot of animals, it hides their anatomy because their fur's so long, and also provides a kind of a shape, like the egg shape here, without it feeling jarring, And the second picture I did, taking it from the first, because the first picture the face was quite small. That was originally just kind of like a stylized vision I had. I just kind of liked how that looked. But then when I got the feedback and they said that, the ears are too far back and the face looks really small and it makes it look quite scary. The eyes were also kind of a reddish shade, which was taken from the idea of like albino rabbits. But I think a few people felt that was a bit unnerving, which is, understandable. So I went back in and I made them blue. Like a greyish blue, which actually, in most depictions of Chansey, their eyes are solid black, but there's the occasional ones. I think the reference that I found was from Pokemon Go, actually, and they have these sort of bluishy grey tints. So I decided to bring those in, and I think it definitely made the picture a lot better, and it worked more so than it did before. And sometimes I get a lot of people say to me like, oh, well, you shouldn't go in and change these pictures just because the fans want them, and I don't, if I don't agree. If I can see their point and I can see where they're coming from, I'm happy to go back and tweak things and essentially try and make the picture better, because as an artist, I think it's, if you're stubborn and dig your heels in and go, no, that's exactly how I wanted it, without taking on any constructive feedback, then you're not going to improve and you're not going to change. So I always try and take constructive feedback on when I'm working on my pictures. And I do mean constructive though, and I've said this in previous podcasts, because some people are just rude and think that they're helping. Saying this is creepy or this picture's rubbish, I don't like it. Well, that doesn't help me. That doesn't make me improve. That doesn't make me change. Like, give me reasons. Like, say, like, I felt like this could do better, or I felt like the eyes looked too intense. Maybe if it was a softer colour, maybe that would work. And that kind of stuff I take on, and I listen. But, the new picture of Chansey, I was really happy with over the first one, to be honest. And I think that's a great thing. I think being able to kind of look at stuff and go, oh, that is definitely improved, is a wonderful thing. I know a few people have asked me to go back and do one without fur, but honestly, one, that takes a long time. I'd have to re-render the entire model, and it would just be a pain. And two, I genuinely don't think it would look very good. And there's no point in me going to that kind of effort when I could be working on something else, just to kind of appease people's curiosity. And I don't mean that in a rude way, but, I have a lot of work on. I am a professional artist, and, whether I'm working on Pokemon Zoology or I'm working on a job or whatever it is, my time is valuable and I have to balance it. And if I don't think it's worth my time, then I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. But that doesn't mean that I don't take on suggestions. If someone suggests something, I'm happy to listen and have a think about it. And, if I actually do like the ideas, then sometimes I will go and try stuff out. But, this time just isn't one of them. So, and then the last one that I've done this month was actually kind of a surprise one, which was Jigglypuff. And I know a few people were a bit confused because I had done Jigglypuff a long time ago, but admittedly, it is one of the worst pictures that I've done. I don't mean that in a sense that I didn't like the design or I didn't like some of the elements I put into it. I mean that my technical skills have improved dramatically since then. I did not know how to do fur very well. To be honest, I hadn't practiced. I didn't know how to do it in 3D. I was desperately trying to matte paint it and mix it together, and sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. And the original picture felt a bit flat. And it's okay to be able to look back at your work and say, it's good for what it is, but it's not where I am now, and I can go back and do something different. So that's exactly what I did with Jigglypuff. And again, I know a few people weren't too pleased that I went for the furry aspect, but it's exactly the same reason why they made it furry in Detective Pikachu, because realistically, if it had no fur, it would look creepy. And there are these Pokemon, like the pink ones and whatnot, with the big eyes and everything like that. They are the cute ones. They are the ones that people favour because they are cute and adorable and whatnot. And there's a very fine line between cute and horrific. So sometimes I have to make these decisions and go down this route. But again, it's like I said with Chansey, it's the fur helps hide the anatomy because Jigglypuff is literally a head with arms and legs strapped to the bottom, which is something that I've discussed in the past with like Mankey and whatnot that I find incredibly frustrating, especially when I'm trying to translate them into something realistic. But using fur helps to kind of has the idea that you can hide that anatomy in there, and there is, if you imagined if you fully shaved Jigglypuff, yes, it would still have a massive head, but there would be a body under there. A lot of the influences that I pulled from for Jigglypuff was bush babies, and because they have such huge ears and huge eyes and quite small bodies, it felt like it was a good fit. As I was developing it, though, I realised that bush babies have quite long muzzles. Their faces are quite thin. Because Jigglypuff has got this kind of squat little face, it ended up looking a little bit more cat-like than the bush babies I based it on. But, that's fine. It's developmental, and things change and shift as you go along, as you put more and more work into it. It's all right to have like an idea in your head and to pull from reference, but things change and it's okay. I think I was really happy with the curl this time. Previous ones where I've tried to do curls, I essentially sculpted the curl and then laid fur on it, but the problem was that ended up looking a bit like a big growth on the top of their head, whereas really I want it to look like flowing fur. So using fibre mesh and ZBrush, I was able to figure out a way to create this curl, and it looked great, but it did need a little bit of layering and whatnot using photo reference. Funnily enough, for the curls, I didn't actually look at any animals, because animals generally don't have these big curls. I looked at humans with quiffs and pulled some of that into the picture. But overall, I was really happy with this. It's a huge improvement from the original, and definitely feels like it fits as part of Pokemon Zoology now. And yeah, I was just very happy with how it turned out. And I think a lot of people really liked it. I was worried that a huge amount of people would be really creeped out by it, but I got a good reception, so that was wonderful. And I'm glad everyone liked it. So yeah, so Wigglytuff is still on the list, so that's going to be an interesting one to do, but I'm glad I now have a better basis to build on and use this original Jigglypuff picture as a reference to create Wigglytuff. So now I've got some questions here. The first question I've got here today is from J Butler 1987, and they ask, I'd love to know how you do your backgrounds. Are they HDRIs or have they been modelled? So yeah, this is a very interesting question. Basically, a lot of the backgrounds I don't make in 3D. I take the model, I sculpt it in ZBrush and poly paint it in there, and when I'm happy I export it using Keyshot Bridge into Keyshot, which is a wonderful rendering program, and I use HDRI lighting textures to create realistic environments and get those wonderful reflections in the eyes and whatnot. I often also put in a few stage lights in there just so that I can get some highlights in certain areas, because HDRIs are great, but sometimes you don't get very strong directional lighting, so I'll put those in just so that I can get some of the highlights in certain areas. But the actual backgrounds themselves, I don't model. I matte paint them in Photoshop, sorry. If you don't know what matte painting is, it's basically taking photographs and textures and cutting bits out and layering different things to create a new scene. It's very common practice in concept art in the industry. It's something that it's allowed me to get some really interesting detail in there. I do a lot of digital painting within that as well, but the majority is matte painted. And what I'll do, it'll be a flip between finding a kind of a background I want beforehand and then using the HDRIs in Keyshot to kind of find something that fits, or I'll do the full rendering and the lighting first, and I'll go in and then I'll look for stuff. The second one is far more difficult because finding something that matches a lighting thing that you've done already is not easy. I'm very lucky that I've been able to find a huge amount of photo reference and photo packs across the internet. I find them mainly through Gumroad, and sometimes you can even find them on ArtStation and DeviantArt and whatnot, but they're usually where someone's gone to another part of the world and has taken some really fantastic photos. So I usually buy them, and then it means that I've got some really good environments that I can do. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have something in mind for it, but I've built a huge reference library on my computer with thousands and thousands of images for me to pull from. And I suggest that if you're an artist and you're wanting to create new work and you're interested in things like matte painting, or even just having like strong reference rather than scouting Google and doing all of that, which can be laborious and take a lot of time. And also there's a real risk of taking something that is copyrighted. That you need to respect those things. You can't just kind of grab somebody else's photos or artwork and use that to build something new. It's you have to respect people and their professions. So I like to buy them because then I can do what I like with those pictures once I've bought them. They usually come with a form of license that comes with them. But I do try my best not to just take a photo and stick it in the background. I try and take elements of lots of different ones and build them into the scene so it creates something brand new. So yeah, that's how I do my backgrounds. Moving on to the next question. We've got one from Candle Toy here, and they say, have you ever thought about animating your creations? Yes, I would love to, but people have to remember that, one, I'm not an animator. I'm a concept artist. So everything that I do is, within those realms. They're not really designed to be moved or whatever, or animated. And also, the models that I create originally look generally very different to the final piece, because I do a huge amount of work in post in Photoshop. So that would be layering textures, using photos of animals, and maybe I'll just cut out around the eye just so that I get a bit more naturalistic blend on the eyelids or something along those lines. So, they can't really be animated in their purest form. Saying that, I've had a few people come to me, companies and whatnot, asking if they can animate it. And, if they have a license for Pokemon, that's 100%, because I don't want to get in trouble and I don't want them to get in trouble either. But the reality of it is that if I were going to do a full animated render of these creatures, it would probably require a team of very, very talented modelers and riggers who maybe would take my base model and take my final artwork and then recreate a model that looks more like the one in the picture. I use 3D as a tool for my artwork. I don't consider myself a 3D artist. So yeah, it's something that I would be very happy to do, or something that I would love to work with a team. I think also the element is that if I were to go forward with something along those lines, I would need to fully trust the team and have faith in their work. That's not like a snobby thing. I'm not saying there aren't some very talented students out there, and I do get a lot of students asking to animate my stuff, but if I were going to move forward with it and I'd want it to be the highest quality, basically. So working with a team who has an experience in working specifically with animals more than anything, then I would consider it. But for now, it's just pictures, I'm afraid. So yeah. Next picture I've got here is from someone called I Don't Post Stuff, Just Look at Stuff, which is a cool name. And they say, are there any older pictures that you might like to redo? Now, obviously, I discussed this with Jigglypuff. Personally, I just want to say this for the record. It's not that nice to go to an artist and say, hey, you should redo this because it's not as good as something else or whatnot. That can be quite offensive, because especially if you don't know what the artist feels about that picture, they may really love it. And if you're saying, I don't think it's good enough, do it again, that can come across as rude. So yeah, please don't suggest ones for me to do. But as I've proven over and over again, I'm happy to go back and do ones. I did it with the starter Pokemon. I loved the starter Pokemon, the original ones I did, I really do. But I felt like I could give it another go and do something different. And then I did the celebration picture with the 3 starters in a new style. And I was really happy with them. So yeah, are there any others that I might go back and do? Yes. I don't particularly want to say which ones. Maybe some of the really, really early ones that I did, such as maybe Eevee, I might do again, just because I've learned a lot more about fur and whatnot. But yeah, I'll only do it one if I have time or I feel like it's necessary. So yeah, don't be expecting much from me. But yeah, you may see some remakes eventually. And then the last question from Goodfella47, and they say, what is the most challenging Pokemon still to come? I always say any ones with feathers. Feathers are just a nightmare. You ask any 3D designer and they will tell you feathers are a nightmare. And quite hard to make look realistic, unless you have a really, really powerful computer where you can essentially render out every single feather individually with all the fibers attached to it, which most of the time, me included, we don't have the computer power to do that. So yeah, any ones with feathers. So I've still got Pidgeotto, I've still got the legendary birds to do. All of those are going to be a challenge, I think. I think something that most people think I get challenged with or get stuck with would be ones like Jinx or Mr. Mime. And yes, they are a challenge. They are definitely in their own right a challenge. The one thing about doing something that is further away from realistic animals is that people tend to be able to suspend their disbelief a little bit more, because you've never seen anything like that in real life, so you can look at the picture and kind of go, okay, well, I've never seen anything like that, so I'm far more open to kind of go with that and say that that's what it is. Whereas if there's something that looks like an animal that you see day to day, or you know very well, like a horse or something along those lines, or a bird, you subconsciously pick up a lot more of the idiosyncrasies, or like the slight mistakes or whatever in the anatomy. You may not be able to like pinpoint what those are, but if you can recognize it easier. So for me, doing the more wild and crazy design creatures are definitely more in my wheelhouse, and I get to have a lot more fun with them, and people seem to like them a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, that's each one brings its own challenge. And so guys, thank you so much. This is the end of the podcast. So I just want to say a big shout out to my Patreon supporters. We have Bridget D Laurent, Sam Simmons, Garber, Nikki Wolf, Exitus, Eren Cris Sol, and Jamie Dunbar. Thank you to all of you guys for your help and support. It really means the world to me. And yeah, guys, I'm check out my Patreon if you want to see. I'm going to have loads of behind the scenes stuff in there. I'm writing some stories at the moment. It's like you get a chapter a month. So if you like the mini stories that come underneath my pictures, then you will definitely enjoy these stories. You get wallpapers, you get all sorts of things like time lapses and whatnot that most people don't see on my YouTube channel. So yeah, check it out, and if you can support, then I really, really appreciate it. It's the lifeblood of this project. It keeps me going. If you'd love to get any prints, then head over to my Etsy store. There's a link in pretty much all of my social medias. Otherwise, you can just go to Etsy and search Joshua Dunlop and you'll find it. And I've got loads and loads of prints. Got brand new prints, including many of the pictures that I talked about today, like Nidorino, Nidorena. Check it out. I think there's some really cool ones. Even the ones that I talked about last month are now up there, so like Flygon and Xerneas. So yeah, thank you guys all for listening. I really, really do appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.